Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 11th Nishan Forum on World Civilizations. I'm Li Qiuyuan, coming to you live from CGTN, China Global Television Network. And now we're coming to you live in the beautiful city of Qufu in East China's Shandong province. And today we have the honor of hosting a very special panel discussion featuring a number of distinguished guests, leaders, and great minds. The focus of our conversation today will be Ren and Li, Confucian ethics for global governance. So before we dive in, please allow me to introduce to you my awesome panel. Please welcome Ambassador Siniša Belian, Ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina to China. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
And Professor Steve Fuller, thank you. Professor Steve Fuller, Fellow of the UK Academy of Social Sciences, Fellow of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, and Chair Professor of Sociology at the University of Warwick. Thank you for coming, Professor.
Thank you.
Please also welcome Ambassador Mohammed Rashid, President of the China Maldivian Cultural Association and former Ambassador of the Maldives to China. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, please welcome Professor Chandra Satyawan, Vice Chair of Education and Foreign Affairs at the Supreme Council for Confucian Religion in Indonesia, Professor and former President of the Indonesia's President's University. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, gentlemen. And as we speak, this panel discussion is streamed live on our platforms worldwide, including on YouTube, Weibo, Facebook, and X. Remember, your input is valuable, so we invite you to join our conversation by sharing your comments or asking questions in the chat. We might just read out your comment and have our guests here to weigh in. So let's get started, gentlemen. There's a famous quote from Confucius that goes as 有朋自远方来，不亦乐乎, which translates into, is it not a pleasure to have friends coming from afar? And I think this quote could be more fitting for this moment, right? It's truly remarkable that despite coming from different parts of the world, we have all gathered here in Qufu, the birthplace of Confucius. So why don't I start with your first impressions of Qufu? Professor Satyawan, let me begin with you. Have you got a chance to explore the city a bit? What struck you the most?
Yes, because I already came here more than one time, or two times, or three times. So what impressed me most is the deep cultural continuity you can feel in Nissan. Yeah? Despite the modern world, here we are reminded that value like Ren and Li are not abstract. The real people here practice it. I saw young people, scholars, even farmers engaging with Confucian ideals, and not just as a theory. Yeah. So this is very, the conjunction between heritage and action is very powerful. Yeah? It is a living testament to the timeless relevance of Confucius' teachings in building peaceful world.
It is fascinating to see the legacy of Confucius still evident in the daily lives and values of the people here living in Qufu. Thank you, Professor. What about you, Ambassador Rashid? What impressed you the most about this place?
Well, my first visit to Qufu was in 2012. And then after several years, I came last year and then this year. The feeling I had when I first came as a student of sinology from 50 years ago, since 1970s, the sacredness of the city, reminding the teachings of Confucius about benevolence, humanity, selflessness and all that, having those values been internalized for a long time, and my visit to Qufu reminds me the sacredness of this city and the people's humility towards visitors as well as among themselves, and also the unity of the people, the smallest unit among the families, how they foster these relationships and things like that. So always my coming to Qufu remind me how 5,000 years ago, from the early times of Confucius, how this city has been flourished
with these core values of Li and Ren.
Yeah, it's 5,000 years. This city's got a history, spans over 5,000 years. It was once the state of the ancient, it was the capital of the ancient state Lu during the spring and autumn period. So the city has a lot to offer. What about you, Professor? Any cultural elements or tradition about the city of Chufu that you find fascinating?
Well, if I may answer the question in a more specific way, because I only arrived here yesterday for the first time in Chufu. And I want to say something about the building and about Confucius's relationship to this building that we're speaking from. Because for those of you who don't know, there is a 72-meter statue of Confucius that stands. And the interesting thing for me is where it stands in relation to the building. Because it doesn't stand in front of the building, and it doesn't stand directly behind the building, but it's off behind on the side, right? Like somebody who's giving advice, right? And that's kind of the way I kind of see Confucius, as a sort of person can offer advice, but doesn't block the way, right? Because you wouldn't want a 72-meter statue in front of a place that's trying to set forward what's happening in the future. But he's, as it were, in the back, on the side, and very noticeable.
Well said, Professor. And what about you, Ambassador? Anything interesting about the city?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. This is my second time to visit Chufu. And what impressed me the most is a sense of calm and the reflection. So this city is not just a beautiful city, it's like living a classroom. So you can really feel the spirit of Confucius here. And what also impressed me is how local community has brought tradition to life. So it's not just like a museum, but also through warm hospitality and very meaningful experiences here. So everything, as Professor mentioned, how it is designed, the architecture, how they organize tours. So everything encourages somehow to slow down, to learn, to listen, to connect with culture. So I think that this blend of history, culture, and openness just offer incredible experience.
Well, we've got some first-time visitors. We've got some return visitors. I'm very glad all of you gentlemen are having a good time here. But you know, we're now living in a time of unprecedented upheavals, right? The conflicts in the Middle East, in Europe and in Africa have displaced millions, and the economic nationalism and trade tariffs, they're unsettling the global economy. So amidst such complex, Ambassador, let me start with you this round. Which core values from the Confucius thinking do you believe hold the key to navigating today's challenges?
So today we live in a deeply interconnected world. So even physically far, in a certain context, whatever is going on somewhere, it has impact on us. And with a number of ongoing wars at many different sides of the world, with raising nationalism, with the growing social divides, I think it is very important that two things about all of them. First of all is empathy, and the second one is accountability. The empathy allows us to see people, not just politics, to respond to refugees, to respond to poor, to respond to the people in need, and even to those we disagree with in a human way. Accountability makes sure that we act with good intentions, with fairness. So these two values, in fact, can help to. These are good foundation in order to build trust between different countries, between communities, and even within institutions. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have had conflict 30 years ago, and we know very well the value of these two words, empathy and accountability.
Empathy and accountability. What do you think of what's being said, Professor?
Well, let me say something about when I first found out about Confucius. When I was a kid, as a teenager, there's this very famous book by Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher, right? Socrates, Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, right? The four great sages of the ancient world. It was a very influential book when I was a kid. And he characterized Confucius, because he compared Confucius to Jesus in terms of the golden rule and what sometimes we call in the West the silver rule. And Confucius is the silver rule. And it's an interesting rule in this context of the question you're asking. Do not do unto others as you would not want to be done to yourself, right? So it's not a positive statement. It's a statement about not harming others in the way you would not want to be harmed yourself. And I think we're talking about the sorts of wars we're in at the moment, where a lot of these wars have to do with irreconcilable values in a certain way. That might be the best you can hope for, right? That you don't do harm, the kind of harm that you would not want done to you, without necessarily thinking that you know some kind of absolute good answer to the whole situation.
These are very, cornerstone values of Confucianism, which is also labeled here as Ren, I believe, which is also translated into benevolence or humaneness.
I know, but it's a little different.
Kind.
It's a little bit different. That's the point. It's a little bit because it's really about avoiding harm to other people and being mindful of that, even if you don't know what it means to do good for them.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And Ambassador Rashid, what do you think?
See, from my perspective, why is there a conflict? What is the origin of a conflict? I think it is, from my perspective, it is misunderstanding. And misunderstanding and disrespect. Meaning to say that one side, or if there's a conflict in a family between two children, the conflict arises because each other do not want to listen to each other. And he or she says, I'm right, and then the conflict arises. Here, the respect comes in. If we have the core values of mutual respect and mutual learning, and to resolve this whole thing through dialogue, understanding, then here comes the selflessness. Because the arrogancy of a person that kind of evoke his or her stand to say that I'm right. But when this arrogancy goes into humility, showing that the other person is also human, just like myself or the other, then there can't be a conflict. And then you talk, what do you mean by that? So today what we see, these complex conflicts globally, is totally a misunderstanding and also disrespect. To say that I'm right and you should listen to me. Instead of looking into the whole thing of a mutual learning, I would like to learn what you're doing it, and this is right. And to solve these conflicts, I think it is a respect, is a core value, and forgiveness.
Mutual respect, mutual learning, these are very critical in making decisions when it comes to global affairs these days. And Professor Satyawan, your thoughts on this? Can I get your take as well?
Yes, the most urgently needed value, according to me, is self-restraint, self-control. Most of the world suffering, wars, inequality, ecological collapse, is not due to lack of knowledge or technology, but because humans cannot control their greed and endless ambitions. Confucianism reminds us through Ren, benevolence, and Li, ritual order, to live in moderation, to care of others, and act with propriety. Right? And mutual respect, just mentioned just now, ensures our values, diverse perspectives, countering divisive nationalism. Dialogue as a practical expressions of this value fosters understanding over confrontations, and enabling collaborative solutions to global challenges. But these values means little unless they are put into a daily practice by leaders, parents, teachers, and especially those people in power.
And Professor Fuller, I saw you are nodding your head when Professor Satyawan mentioned the values of self-control, Ren and Lee.
Yeah, because I
Do you
think
wanna
that
add to
was I think that was kind of what I was getting at with do not do harm, even if you don't know what good is. I mean, part of the arrogance comes from thinking you already know what the right answer is for somebody else, right? And that then motivates you to impose your will on them, right? Which then causes all this disrespect and all the rest of it. And I think in a way Confucius, by as it were, putting what in the West we call the golden rule kind of in the inverse, it says, look, you know, you might not know how to do good, but you can certainly figure out how not to do harm.
But how can these values like Ren and Li, these Confucius values, be applied practically to today's global governance and international relations, do you think?
Well, that's a tough one because I do think a lot depends on what the goal is, right? Because if we talk about common human values, it's been a very big topic in this conference so far, and I actually think that's a very difficult thing to talk about literally. I think there are some basic common things that human beings want. Right, but the kinds of values that inform their wanting them might be very different, right? And they may have different kinds of motivations and histories, right? Because part of the thing about Confucianism, which makes this a little tricky, I would just say, is that the emphasis on diversity, right? What does diversity mean exactly here? Well, diversity means you're going to be respecting people's values and so forth, and then that sets you up for the possibility of disagreement already, right? If we're all living in the same world. Right? We're not just living in separate worlds when we're diverse, we're living in the same world. And so that's where I think the idea of how much you can expect to accomplish, right? I mean, you can stop wars, but that doesn't mean you're going to have some kind of global governance order that's going to ensure peace forever, right? And I think one needs to be kind of modest about what the ambitions can be in that respect. And I would take that's sort of the Confucius line on this. But that's just what I'm no specialist on this, but that's what I would take it to be.
Now, you just mentioned diversity. There's a common expression in Confucius thinking that goes as he or butong, harmony without uniformity.
That's right. That's kind of what I'm getting at, right? And so that's interesting from the standpoint of what international order looks like. Because I do think, again, I don't know how much we want to go into this whole international affairs stuff, but it does seem to me that if you look at something like the United Nations, for example, which is founded on idea of you know, this Declaration of Universal Human Rights, that's a very strong position, it seems to me, right? In the sense that it's not harmony within, it really is talking about some very fundamental things that all people need to uphold as values, okay? And I'm taking the Confucius line to be a kind of pulling back from that might be too much to demand. And that instead that one has harmony where you recognize differences in the way in which humanity pursues itself. I mean, that's kind of where so there is a sense in which, again, I don't know how controversial you want to be, but I think that the Confucian position in a way is a kind of implicit critique of the way in which the United Nations, you know, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been constructed. That's just what I would say, that there's a kind of tension there. And that harmony through diversity indicates that.
I also want to get your take on this, Ambassador, on the matter of diversity, inclusivity, and the phrase that we just mentioned, Hora Butom. Basically, harmony without uniformity from the Confucius thinking means that people can, you know, despite having differences, they can still live together in harmony. For example, when I was little, my parent told me that if I have an argument or a disagreement with my friend or my neighbor, instead of arguing over what's right, what's wrong, the emphasis should be on finding a solution that works for both sides, right? Respect both sides' perspectives. So with that in mind, how do you look at the Confucius value of Hora Buton, harmony without uniformity, working in resolving global conflicts?
So we don't have to be all the same in order to live and work together. So instead of asking the question who is right, it's better to ask question how we can live together with our differences. whether it is about misunderstanding between two neighbors, between two nations, between two countries. So the path forward is always the same. We have to listen to each other carefully, to be concerned. And also we have to find a common ground acceptable for all sides, even if we start from a very, very small points. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we, as I mentioned, had a conflict 30 years ago, and we learned this in a hard way. So the peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina didn't come because we suddenly, all of us, three different ethnic groups, we started to think in the same way. We didn't. But the peace came because we started to understand each other, to respect each other's identity. And then we started to build institutions together, and we are building a shared future together.
It's great to get the perspective from Bosnia's Herzegovinas. Thank you very much, Ambassador. What about you, Ambassador Rashid?
See, when you said something about early childhood bringing up, when I was growing up with four other siblings, my parents always say, look at your hand. You have 5 fingers. 5 fingers are different. You are born with that, and you are going to die with that, which means the diversity. And from my interpretation, with my professional interpretation, I find that if our 5 fingers are equally the same, our hands won't be as versatile as that. And the other thing is to trust. Here's the mutual trust we have to build up, even among the siblings also. That trust, unless there's no trust, it is very difficult to each other to communicate. Because every time if I want to tell you something and I have to prove myself through so many other teachings and things like that, the bond of trust cannot be developed very much. So I think for these complex situations, first we have to learn is the trust. And then, of course, when it comes to leaders, there should be, to build this whole value of trust, or the nature of trusting each other, doesn't come overnight. It comes from through an individual's selflessness, and also the empathy and the benevolence that goes in. Just like something we could say always, I mean, taking even the 5 fingers, you know, why should I want whole world to be the same as me? You know, if it is so, how monotonous could it be? But the thing is, here we have to learn to trust to live with this diversity and the respect, and each other, to learn from each other's strengths and weaknesses. So this sharing of this whole, the benevolence and the empathy and all that comes, with that we have to build trust each other. I think a lot of conflicts, global conflicts, it's a matter of trust, and it's a matter of over-greediness.
Fostering mutual trust despite having differences, that can be key in today's world, as we are standing at a juncture that is more intricate and more challenging than ever before. Let me get your take, Professor. What's your take on, you know, how Confucius value can be applied into resolving conflicts globally?
Yeah, just now as mentioned our previous speakers, it's very important to accept differences, agree in disagreement. Yeah. So with this, and then we respect others. Of course, not regarding the truth, not monopoly the truth. Yeah. So if you monopoly the truth, it means you will not accept other ideas, right? So we should. What we aim in this world is a small truth, right? The absolute truth belongs to the Almighty God. That's why dialogue, find the solutions. Deep learning and listening. So it's very difficult for someone to listen, right? Listen deeply. So like Confucius taught, we must listen deeply, seek common ground, yeah, and avoid arrogance. Yeah. A wise leader does not suppress differences, but integrates it in mutual respect, and not dominations. So fair in competitions. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, the thought of Confucianism, it promotes peaceful coexistence, the idea of peaceful coexistence. But we also have other school of thoughts, believes otherwise. For example, Samuel Huntington's clashes of civilizations thesis predicts inevitable clashes between different cultural blocs. Professor Fuller, so comparing the two theses, comparing two thoughts, which one do you think better explains reality and which one offers practical solutions to you?
Well, it's interesting you bring up Huntington's Clash of Civilization thesis because, again, most of you in the audience are too young to remember this, but when this book first came out in 1996, I believe, it wasn't taken that seriously. This is the interesting point. Because everybody was reading Fukuyama's book, right, The End of History and the Last Man, and everybody thought, you know, Western-style globalization was the future. And that book by Fukuyama doesn't even mention China, right? Doesn't even mention China. But that was what the world looked like in 1992 at the end of the Cold War. And that kind of went on until 9/11. And then it was after 9/11 that Huntington's book got revived, right? And then because Huntington, in the Clashes of Civilizations that he's talking about, Islam gets a big, it's very focused. His focus is very much on that, which nobody was taking seriously until 9/11. And so now since that time, of course, with all the other things that have happened since then, people have taken this book very seriously, okay? So that's an interesting point about the history of that book, which continues to have relevance now. I mean, I think the thing I would say about that book, again, I don't know how much you want to go into it, but a lot of the book, so part of it is there are radical value differences in the world, and they can't be resolved. And the reason, and one of the main reasons why they can't be resolved for him is because of population trends. Right? He sees the Islamic world, for example, as populating very much more than the rest of the world, and that creates a kind of a sort of competition for resources. And that's kind of the way he pushes the clash. Right? So you have the value differences, but then you have the resource constraint issues, and those things work in a very kind of diabolical way to cause wars to happen. That's basically what he's saying. Now, you have to ask, well, let's say the details of his argument are wrong. Nevertheless, there is something there, I think, and then the question becomes, when Confucius talks about, you know, harmony through diversity, how do you resolve that situation? Because Huntington recognizes diversity, that's for sure, right? But he says it's unresolvable because of the resource constraints, and that there are inevitably going to be battles. And how do you resolve them? And I think that's the challenge for anyone who wants to put forward a kind of Confucian view in this kind of world. That's what I would say.
Ambassador Rashid, what do you think?
See, when I think of this resource constraint, again, how we define the constraint, how much is a constraint? That comes the word, the greediness comes in.
Right.
You know, so it is to say that when you have resource constraint, can't you coexist together with the resources that we have? Instead of looking into the cultural diversity. But as the professor said, the Clash of Civilization, which comes to my mind, I read the book during the 90s when it came out, and I felt why they are taking these faiths into this whole spectrum. Because these faiths are also be believed or practiced by the human beings. So, above all, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Taoism or Buddhism, above all is the humanness, what Confucius is trying to say. You know, the whole thing where he says under the heaven, everyone, the whole, it's a humanness that we are forgetting about. So what I think is, it's a resource the word constraint is also a relative word which brings the conflict in.
And gentlemen, I'd like to move on to the concept of Li, which at its core is about the idea of establishing social orders through proper conduct or ethical norms. For example, if a community wants to build a park, from Confucius thinking, everybody should have a voice in deciding when, where, and how this park should be built. So with that in mind, Ambassador, how do you look at, the values of Li from Confucianism continue to shape global cooperation in today's world?
Thank you for the question. So Li is about clear rules, how we live and how we work together. In international cooperation, I would say that it helps focus less on politics, but more on inclusiveness, more on a fair approach, trying to find a way to work together. So generally speaking, the idea that the world belongs to everyone is very important. And it means that global decisions should help to everyone, not just to serve interests of strongest. I would share with you, I would try to be very practical, and I would share with you my personal experience. So I arrived to China 2 years ago, approximately. And during this time, I have learned something very important about Chinese people. Bosnia and Herzegovina is quite a small country in comparison with huge China. But I was always, as ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina, small country in comparison with huge China, was treated with respect. So for me, it was very clear that for our Chinese friends and partners, there are no small and big countries. There are no small and big cities. There are just small and big friends. And I'm very proud to say that I feel that my country is very, very big friend with China. And I do believe that this approach of Chinese people is rooted, deeply rooted in Confucius' philosophy. That is why I always say when I speak with Chinese people, that is why, because of this approach, Chinese people and the government of China deserve all our respect. So whether we are talking about climate change, about any global issue, peace building, public health, we always have to make sure that every single country in this world, big or small, has a voice. That is very important.
You mentioned the world belongs to all. That in Chinese is 天下为公. This is a classic expression from Confucianism. Professor Satyawan, let me get your take on this. 天下为公, this phrase, it highlights the ideal of an order that's founded on the common good. How are you looking at this?
Yes, first of all, I just want related to the Li value first. Li is not about the manner. Beyond that, about ethical order rooted in the common good. Back to your questions about the world belong to all. Yeah. It means this is a revolutionary ideas. Yeah. It suggests that governance is not the privilege to the strong, but the responsibility of the moral. So moral responsibility is very important. If the global leaders adopted Li as a guiding principle, international cooperation will move away from zero-sum thinking, zero-sum games, yeah? But to share stewardship. For example, climate change, as mentioned just now, whether we can govern not just for our nations, but for the earth, yeah, for the all. And then so far, of course, we know this is not successfully being done by all the nations, right? But this is very important, especially let me start from educations. So in the educations for all also, fostering Li for the students is very important in educations because creating equitable systems, yeah, for the diverse student backgrounds, and then as a microcosm of how Li can promote trust and collaborations. Yeah. Trust and collaboration.
Trust and collaboration. And there's a sense of shared responsibility, right? Yes. That is closely related to the initiative proposed by China, a community with a shared future for mankind. Ambassador Rashid, let me get your take on the concept of Li.
I think, thank you very much. I think the ambassador has already mentioned, I think it's a standing example. The Maldives, the country I come from, is the smallest country when we joined the United Nations and recognized China. And even today, in many ways, when we have these cultural exchanges between China and Maldives, China sees as equal partners, mutual respect. That's most important. And then the common good for all, and taking the park example and everything. So it's the basic thing is to see how the current generation, I mean the people who educate the children, the students in schools, can ingrain these values of benevolence and mutual respect and understanding. And for example, the organization that I represent today, China Maldivian Cultural Association's motto is cultural understanding, everlasting friendship. So when we understand the culture of another country and when we respect that, then the friendship comes. When the friendship comes, we would not be advocating for conflicts. So I think these are core values of humanness. It's immaterial which philosophies you are advocating, but we as human beings has to be the recipient of these core values. And so it is 5,000 years ago, but when I start first reading Analects of Confucius, I start thinking for myself, goodness, it's 5,000 years ago, even these sages, philosophers, has taught human beings as human beings, where these human values are, and on which the cultural values kept on building on. So I think the key word here is just mutual learning, mutual respect, and dialogue.
Professor Fuller, give us your interpretation of the Confucian value Li and its relevance. Yes, its relevance today.
Okay, what I would say is, well, Western scholars of Confucius have mixed views about Li because it's very easy if you read Confucius superficially to think that Li is ritual, which is kind of a bad thing in the West, right? If you're ritual, you're traditional, you're old-fashioned, you're conservative, right? You're bad. But the interesting thing is if you look at the detail of what Confucius says about Li, he's very clear that Li is not mechanical. It's not like the mechanical, right? There's a sense in which you have to put your person into it, right? You have to merge with it, right? It has to proceed smoothly, he sometimes says, right? That whatever rituals you're doing, they look like they're coming from you, right? They don't look like something that's something's phony, right? It has to be natural in a certain way. And I think that's really interesting, kind of, in terms of this issue that we're talking about the international order. That's an interesting thing in terms of how one interprets international law, okay? Because international law, in a way, is a kind of ritual, right? Globally, enforced ritual, you might say. But a lot depends on the spirit in which the law is enforced, right? And you might say there's a kind of good spirit and a bad spirit in which to enforce the same international law. And I think somebody like Confucius draws attention, you might say, to that fact, right? And so that's kind of where I would position Li with regard to the international issue.
So we've talked about Ren, we've talked about Li. Let's also talk about global governance. And speaking of that, one of the most famous Confucian thought on this topic would be a moral sequence, which goes as 修身, 齐家, 治国, 平天下, which means cultivate the self, manage the family, govern the state, and then bring peace to the world. Ambassador, what does this principle mean to you? How do you see its relevance today?
So to me, this principle is a reminder that good leadership should start from the leader's own character. So leader itself must be honest, must be self-disciplined, must be self-aware in order to be able to effectively lead others. So if leader is lacking personal integrity, even the best policies will not earn trust. So if leader is fair and if it is strong at home, it will be even recognized internationally as a strong leader. So in 21st century, so this is very important. Now I'm again highlighting the words from the beginning. It's important, empathy and accountability. So these principles are very valuable in local, domestic, and global leadership.
Your take on this, Professor Fuller?
Well, Okay, so the first thing I would say, right, so there's a sense in which what Confucius is trying to say is, you discipline yourself and it sort of redounds down to and becomes the whole world. I think I would start with the beginning and say the issue about the self-restraint as being the way, the first mode of control, you might say, is the self-control. And then when you're talking about regulating the family and the state and the world, that principle operates as well throughout. That's because that's kind of an interesting point, right? Whether we're talking about the same notion of control in each of those stages we're talking about. Confucius seems to suggest they are, in which case you want to know in the beginning what sort of control you want to have over yourself before you start talking about controlling the family, controlling the state, and controlling the world. And I would have thought in the spirit of Confucius there would be self-control. So there would be restraint in all of these different levels of governance, right? So it wouldn't be very activist in that sense. That's what I would suppose. Others may disagree, but I would have thought that's kind of the most benign way to interpret this.
This is a pathway from personal development to global leadership.
Yeah. I mean, because the reason why I'm saying it this way is because if you look at somebody like Plato as a contrast figure, right? Plato is someone who has this kind of similar kind of view, right? If you can control yourself, you can control the state, you can control the world, kind of thing, right? But it's quite clear with him that he has some ideas about this, about what what your soul is made of three parts, right? And then the society is made of three parts, and then the world is made of three parts, right? That's kind of more the way he operates. It's a very kind of rationalistic kind of way of setting it out, right? Where it's not just it's more active, right? I think Confucius in that respect is less active, and that's again this is quite important from understanding the difference between kind of the Western and Eastern takes on this business of what does it mean to have these different levels of control.
That's a very interesting comparison. We have different approaches. Ambassador Rashid, your thoughts on this?
See, when we talk of leaders, what I believe is leaders don't grow on trees, they are nurtured. The nurturing comes from the very beginning, from the smallest unit, what we call the family unit. And in that family unit also, when these values are nurtured, it's like Professor said, self-restraint. What should be my limits? How far should my greediness go over my other siblings? That kind of sharing and caring kind of thing. So according to Confucius also, these are core values that makes a great leader. But sometimes some people think the aggressiveness, rather than the aggressiveness, it should be the empathy and benevolence and understanding and trust.
Professor
Yes.
Satyawan, your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah. I want to mention about the importance of family. Family as a school of love. Nurturing, cultivating the heart is very important. So this principle is deeply relevant to our life today and the leaders. Because why? Governance begins not with law, but with personal values. The personal values, as mentioned just now, personal virtue must start from home, from family, right? So when the family, they try to respect filial piety, for example, and then respect with the parents, and then make them can collaborate, collaborate with others, and then this makes the leadership development by emphasizing the personal character and competency. With this, leader must have the model of integrity. Moral integrity is very important, and of course, starting with individually, we should respect others, and then nurture with ethical global mindset, so we can align the personal values with global responsibilities for more peaceful world.
Now, looking at the future, because we've got a number of young folks here in our audience. I'm sure a lot of young people are watching us online right now as we speak. The thinking of Confucius has been around for over 2,500 years. But for these young people, Professor Fuller, what kind of lessons do you think they should take away from the thinking of Confucius?
Well, I mean, if we can go back to this business of Li for a moment, because I think that's kind of a very interesting idea. From the standpoint of where a lot of young people are today, because I think there's a tendency, maybe justifiable tendency, for young people to be very alienated from established norms, right? And in a way they become nihilistic. They just sort of break away, and social media to a certain extent encourages that, and it does so to a large extent by showing that the established authorities really aren't being very sincere when they're following the rules, right? Or they're not following the rules at all once you find out about it. And so this leads to a general kind of skepticism and nihilism on the part of young people. And so what this does is it creates a kind of binary thing where rules are bad, right? Chaos is good, right? I mean, something like that, right? That this becomes then kind of, this binary tends to be, often is operative for younger people, right? And I think with the concept of Li, you can get a more sophisticated kind of notion whereby to follow rules, right, or to follow rituals, right, are actually opportunities for you to come into your own, right, where you have your own personal way of embodying the rules, right, where you can develop what we would say in the West at least is a style. Right, where your individuality is a kind of style of being. The reason why styles can be recognized is because they're a style of something. Right? So in other words, you kind of see like a style of clothing, for example, right? You're wearing clothing. That's kind of that's the ritual, you might say. Everybody has to wear clothes, but they don't all have to wear the same clothes. And the way you style the clothes, right, then in a way shows your form of embodiment and your individuality. And you can live with other people at the same time. You don't have to be so disruptive or chaotic or anything. And I think in a way, because so much of Confucius's writings about Li are a bit, again, I don't want to stereotype, but from a Western standpoint, it often looks like he's talking about the courtier or the ambassador, maybe, right? Somebody whose business it is to represent and to be an adequate, be a good representative and to be, notable, right? But within the rules. And I think that this is kind of something that young people could perhaps learn something from, because I don't think they spontaneously pick this up. Right? They see this kind of binary world where if you're not mechanically following rules which don't work anyway, it's chaos.
What about you, Ambassador Rashid? What sorts of elements should they, the younger generation pick up from Confucius thinking to guide their studies, maybe their personal lives and their careers?
I think it's mostly the self-discipline. Self-discipline is something that has to be nurtured from a very early childhood, When you are self-disciplined, I think they would know what their limits are, and and I always says, it cannot be one's freedom cannot infringe to someone else's freedom, So in that case, the self-discipline for the young people is extremely important. Within the context of self-discipline, we could be, educating on the values of other core values like empathy, benevolence, and all these things. So that can restrain themselves, not making their society a chaotic society.
Thank you so much for your analysis, gentlemen. We still have some time left. We would like to move on to the Q&A session. We're now opening the floor for questions. So guys, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and our staff members will give you a mic. Who's got a question for us? Can you raise your hands? Oh, this lady in the front row, and please also state your name and which panelist your question is for, please.
My name is Liya Jie, a student from Chief Normal University. I want to ask a question. Dear Professor Fuller, what do you think, what are some of the Confucius teachings that you have benefited most from?
That what, excuse me?
That you have benefited the most from.
I would say the Li thing. That's why I've been pushing it so much in this discussion. I think the Li thing is kind of quite interesting in the context of the world we live in. Basically, how do you do something that in a way is rule governed, without seeming mechanical. And especially in an age of artificial intelligence and stuff like that, I think this kind of idea becomes much more salient. Let's put it that way. So yeah, that's what, I don't know if you were at the talk I gave in the morning, but this issue about the relationship between artificial intelligence and human creativity, Lee can figure in that in terms of what is the style of being a human that can be just as intelligent as AI, but nevertheless retain the humanity of it. So I think Confucius might, because the way he talks about Lee is actually quite interesting. I mean, this is where I would, people should delve into that a bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Any more questions? Let us know. Oh, the lady in the back, please.
My name is Liu Xiaotong. I came from Chief Normal University, and now I have a question for Professor CTN.
Yes.
So, how can we promote broader international understanding and acceptance of Confucius' 人and礼 values?
The last.
How can we promote broader international understanding and acceptance of Confucius' 人and礼 values?
Yeah.
How can we promote a broader understanding? Maybe there's some misunderstanding about, some of the Confucius values in the West. How can we promote,
Actually, Ren is a universal principle, universal value, right? But first you can start that the men, women within the forces are brothers and sisters. Yeah. So we are brothers and sisters. Yeah. Or that is from Confucius' teaching also. And back to the value of Ren and Li, that we love each other, yeah, because we are created by the same God Almighty. So we respect others, and then we do not do something that people don't like it to do. So it means we have the empathy feelings by this, and then we treat people as a people, yeah, living for the sake of others with example, and then people will respect us as a Confucian followers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And keep in mind, this panel discussion is also being viewed by viewers online in China and around the world. So why don't we take a look at what's happening online, whether they have any questions for our panelists right here. Just scrolling through some of the comments, looks like we're having quite a lively conversation online. Okay, this is from Balagan from Ontario. I think this is from Facebook. So he asks about China's rapid development over the past 4 decades has drawn global attention. To what extent has Confucian thought influenced policymaking during this period of transformation? Professor Fuller, do you want to take that? How are you looking at this?
I'd like to know the answer to that too, actually. I don't know.
Right.
But from
do you guys know? No, I don't know.
from a foreign perspective, how are you looking at it? Do you see any connection between the Confucian values?
Look, if I have to say, in terms, because for those of you who are old enough to remember, Confucius was not always as prominent as he is now in China, and so I think the importance of Confucius now has a lot to do with China's economic ascendancy, and that Confucius is a very distinctive figure in this regard, right? He's very Chinese, you might say, in terms of embodying certain kinds of values that aren't easily seen in the West as well. And I think this gets promoted now because China is emerged as a very distinctive power in the world. So in a way, I actually see the prominence of Confucius following the economic development of China. You see what I'm saying?
Yes,
right.
but the root, Confucianism is the root that what the China government practice now. After lesson learned from century to century, and then they back to the root teaching of Confucius, especially about harmony. So President Xi always promote the harmony, right? To help with the BRI project, for example. So BRI project must be success because of the harmony and to know others. We want to help others because the work is belong to us. If we can make others success, so make others success is very important. If they are success, of course they will, in economical view, they will import the goods from us, right? Buy the things from China too. So that's why it's the time China always make other countries more prosperous and prosperous. Yeah, that's why cooperations, dialogue, mutual understanding, mutual benefit is very important. That's all the Confucian values rooted, I think.
All right, here's another question. This is from Nancy112 from YouTube. Can the Confucian concepts of Ren and Li help other developing countries make suitable policies in their pursuit of modernization? Ambassador Rashid, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot for the developing countries to learn from the teachings of Confucius, especially when it comes to me, like the professor said, Li. For me, it's Ren is more important than the Li even, you know. In a way, it's a benevolence and the humanness again here comes. So for developing countries, again, the leaders and people has to be so-called it should be for the people. It's for the good of the majority, not for the individual, you know. So in case of China, for example, when whole this ideology of socialism with Chinese characteristics came in, I was questioning myself, what does this Chinese characteristic means? It means that comes the whole socialist with the features of the ancient philosophies of these sages like Confucius or Lao Zhuang or anything like that, which goes it, because these are different kinds of philosophies, because Lao Zhuang philosophy is more circular, whereas Confucius philosophy is more hierarchical. So whatever been said, what I think is the whole thing about for developing countries to learn is, especially the leaders to learn, is the benevolence is the right way to move forward a nation in that direction.
And here's another one. This is from Emmy from YouTube. Do you believe the Confucian ideal of a world of great unity, or 天下大同, the world belongs to all, can come true in the end? Professor Fuller?
Well, see, this is, again, this is something that needs to be worked out not only in the world, but also I think within Confucian thought, what exactly we're talking about, right? Because, and this is why I found it interesting in the talk this morning that made reference to this, use the word cosmopolitanism to describe this. And that's a very interesting word in the Western context, because it basically presupposes that there is this kind of world where everyone is treated equally, right? And this kind of view of cosmopolitanism, which comes from the West, is actually the one that's very much closely associated with human rights. Okay, but somehow I don't think that's quite what. So Kant, Immanuel Kant, is the philosopher in the West who talks about cosmopolitanism. But I don't think the Confucian idea is quite this. This is the point. I don't think it's that idea. I think it's more this harmony and diversity thing, right? Where the all is the harmony, right? But nevertheless recognizing the diversity, right? Without having a kind of universal principle where everybody does the same thing. Because I really think this is kind of a subtle but important difference in the thinking about what all means. Right, and that's I think that's an East-West thing, and we could go into it more because it's very fascinating. Because there's a sense in which this is the world's real problem, right? Right. If we're all going to be in the same planet, are we going to have to live all by the same rules, or is there going to be this harmony through diversity? And if so, what's that going to look like? And I think that's, for the homework assignment for Confucians is to kind of work this out, right? To work out what exactly are you talking about? Yeah.
Professor, you're giving us assignments. So we are running out of time, but before we go, Ambassador, I would like to give the final remarks to you. Is there anything you would like to share with our audience coming here, taking part in this panel discussion? Any takeaway you would like them to take away from?
So I can see that the most of people here are quite young people, so maybe something to them related to Ren and Lee. So, so for me, Ren and Lee are not just philosophical concepts. They are deeply practical values, and I think for young people, Ren can serve as a kind of moral compass. So Ren teaches us how to treat our colleagues, how to treat our classmates, even how to treat our competitors with respect, with understanding. And I do believe that the empathy that I mentioned before builds trust, and trust builds opportunities. So that is very important for young people. On the other hand, Lee, for young people, means to be punctual, to be responsible, and to be professional. So these kind of things you will experience in everyday life, in school, and so on. So both Ren and Lee combined together are very important for young people.
Start with the little steps, right? But also be ambitious.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this panel discussion. That's a wrap for us here at this panel discussion, coming to you live from Chufu. A huge thank you to all our awesome panelists for their insights and analysis. And many thanks to all of you who are watching us here. Thank you for taking part in this forum, and also who are watching us online. We hope you have a wonderful day. Keep watching the forum. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.